Hi, I'm Glenda Cedarleaf, and this bedtime story is called The Golden Key, written many years ago by George MacDonald. So I invite you to become comfortable in the ways that you know best, feeling your body now sink into your bed, knowing that this is your time to relax into a story so you can drift into a deep and restful sleep. So let's begin. There was once a boy who used to sit in the twilight and listen to his great aunt's stories. She told him that if he could reach the place where the end of the rainbow stands, he would find there a golden key. "And what is the key for?" the boy would ask. "What will it open?" "That nobody knows," his aunt would reply. "He has to find that out himself." "Well, I suppose being gold," the boy said thoughtfully, "that I could get a good deal of money for it if I sold it." "Better never find it than sell it," returned his aunt. And so the boy went to bed. He dreamed about the golden key. And now all that his aunt told him about would have been like nonsense for him. However, their little house stood on the borders of fairyland. Out of fairyland, nobody can ever find where the rainbow stands. "Did you ever know anybody who could find it?" the little boy asked one evening. "Yes, your father, I believe, found it." "Well, and what did he do with it? Can you tell me?" "He never told me." "What was it like?" "He never showed it to me." "All I know is that you will be a happy boy if you find that key. Perhaps it will come tumbling down the rainbow from the sky." One evening in the summer, he went out into his room and stood at the lattice window, gazing into the forest, which fringed the outskirts of fairyland. He could see his great-aunt's garden and the straggling trees around it. The forest lay to the east, and the sun, which was setting behind the cottage, looked straight into the dark wood with his level red eye. The trees were all old and had few branches below, so that the sun could see a great way into the forest, and the boy, being keen-sighted, could see almost as far as the sun. The trunks stood like rows of red columns in the shine of the sun, and he began to feel as if the trees were all waiting for him, and that they had something that they could not go on with until he came to them. But he was hungry and wanted to supper, so he lingered, and suddenly, far among the trees, as far as the sun could shine, he saw a glorious thing. It was the end of a rainbow, large and brilliant. He could count all 7 colors and could see shade after shade beyond the violet. Before, the red stood out as the color most gorgeous, but this was a color he'd never seen before, and only the spring of the rainbow arch was visible now. The golden key, he said to himself, and darted out of the house and into the wood. And now it was just before sunset, and the rainbow glowed the brighter. For the rainbow of fairyland is not dependent upon the sun as ours is. The trees welcomed him there, the bushes made way for him, and the rainbow kept growing larger and brighter. It was a grand sight burning away there in silence, with its gorgeous and lovely, delicate colors, each distinct, all combining. He could now see a great deal more of it. It rose high into the blue heavens and bent so little that he couldn't tell how high the crown of the ark was. He stood gazing at it till he actually forgot himself with delight. He even forgot the key which he had come to seek. And as he stood, it grew more wonderful still. He could fairly see beautiful forms slowly ascending, as if by the steps of a winding stair. The forms appeared irregularly, now one, now many, now several, and now none. Men and women and children, all different, all beautiful, drew nearer to the rainbow, and then it vanished. He started back a step in dismay, and it was there again, as beautiful as ever. So he contented himself with standing as near as he might, watching the forms that ascended. And then they faded away into the blue air. And gradually, he really couldn't say where the rainbow ceased. The boy very wisely proceeded to mark out in his mind the space covered by the foundation of the rainbow, in order that he might know where it began. He saw that the rainbow was based chiefly upon a bed of moss. He watched as the moon rose, and then the rainbow vanished again. And any change of place could not restore that vision. So the boy threw himself down on the mossy bed to wait till the sunlight would give him a chance of finding the key. And there he fell fast asleep. When he woke up, the morning sun was looking straight into his eyes. So he turned away from it. And then he saw a beautiful little thing lying on the moss within a foot of his face. It was the golden key. The pipe of it was a plain gold, as bright as gold could be. The handle was curiously wrought and set with sapphires. In delight, he put out his hand and took it and had it. He lay there for a while, turning it over and over and feasting his eyes upon its beauty. Then he jumped to his feet, remembering that the pretty thing was of no use to him yet. Where was the lock to which the key belonged? It must be somewhere. For how could anybody be so silly as to make a key for which there was no lock? Where should he go to look for it? He gazed upon the key and imagined that maybe there would be a keyhole in the clouds or in the grass or in the trees. Then he saw something glimmering in the wood, and he went towards it. Meanwhile, not far from the house where the boy had lived, there was another house, the owner of which was a merchant who was away from home most of the time. He had lost his wife some years before and had only one child, a little girl named Tangle, whom he left to the charge of 2 servants who treated her poorly. One evening, when the little girl was put to bed early before the sun was down, the servants went off to the village, leaving her alone and locking the door behind them. So Tangle decided it was time to escape. She darted to the window, pulled it open, got out, and climbed on the ivy. She scrambled down to the ground and fled to the forest as fast as she could run. And although she didn't know it, this was actually the very best way she could have gone. After running a long way, and as the last of the light was disappearing, she passed under a tree with drooping branches. She climbed up into the tree, and for a while she was caught in its branches. She was frightened. But soon, much to her surprise, a beautiful flying fish came over to her and rescued her. The fish then guided her to a cottage. Tangle found herself now, thanks to the flying fish, standing in that cottage, only to be in the presence of a beautiful, tall, and strong woman who looked at Tangle and said, "There you are. I've been waiting so long for you." Tangle felt comforted, and even though she had just arrived to this cottage, it somehow felt like home. "What's your name?" asked the lady. "Well, the servants always call me Tangle because my hair is so untidy." "Well, I think it's a pretty name, and I'll call you Tangle too. You mustn't mind my asking you questions, and you may ask me the same questions, every one of them, and any others that you like." "How old are you?" "10, answered Tangle. "You don't look like it," said the lady. "How old are you, please?" returned Tangle. "I am thousands of years old," answered the lady. "You don't look like it," said Tangle. "Don't I?" said the woman. When her great blue eyes looked down on the little Tangle, it was as if all the stars were melted to make that brightness. "Ah, but," said Tangle, "when people live long, they grow old. At least I always thought so." "I have no time to grow old," said the lady. "I'm too busy for that. It's very idle to grow old." "What's your name, please?" asked Tangle. "Grandmother," answered the lady. Is it really?" "Yes," said the beautiful woman as she smiled like the sun through a summer shower. Then she took Tangle to see a beautiful place. It was a deep tank, the sides of which were filled with green plants, with flowers of all colors. There was a roof over it, like the roof of a cottage. It was filled with beautiful clear water, in which swam a multitude of fishes, just like the one that led her to the cottage. The lady spoke some words Tangle couldn't understand, and then threw her into the tank. The fish came crowding about her. 2 or 3 of them got under her head and kept it up. The rest of them would rub themselves all over her with their wet feathers. And then the lady who had been watching this water scene unfold spoke again, whereupon some 30 or 40 of the fishes rose out of the water underneath and brought Tangle into the arms of the lady. She carried Tangle back to the fire, where Tangle could warm herself, and the woman, who called herself grandmother, dried Tangle well and covered her in a beautiful linen garment, fragrant with the aroma of grass and lavender. "Won't you give me a pair of shoes too, grandmother?" said Tangle. "No, my dear, no shoes. Look here, I wear no shoes." And so saying, she lifted her dress a little, and there were the loveliest feet and no shoes. So Tangle was content to go without shoes, and grandmother sat down with her again and combed her hair and brushed it and left it to dry while she got supper. She got the bread out of one hole in the wall and milk out of another, and several kinds of fruit out of a third. They ate their dinner, and eventually it was time to go to bed. Tangle was so tired after this unexpected journey that she quickly fell fast asleep. In the morning she awoke to the rustling of leaves over her head and the sound of running water. But to her surprise, she could find no door, nothing but the moss-grown wall of the cottage. So she crept through an opening in the arbor and stood in the forest. And then she bathed in a stream that ran merrily through the trees. She spent the day in the woods listening to the birds. She seemed to understand all that they said, even though each had its own language. That day in the forest, Tangle saw nothing of her grandmother, and yet felt her presence all the time. When the sun began to set, she returned to the cottage. When she opened the door and walked in, she saw a pot boiling on the fire. Grandmother was sitting on the other side of it. "I've been watching you all day as you played in the forest," said Grandmother. This made Tangle feel even more comforted. Then she took Tangle onto her lap and began to sing to her, such songs as made her wish she could listen to them forever. Eventually, a little boy came to the cottage. He was the same boy who used to listen to his great-aunt's stories. This little boy's face was ruddy with health, And although we did not know his name earlier in the story, I'll tell you that his friends called him Mossy because he would sit for whole days reading outside, always in one place, and he sat so long that moss could grow under him. Hence his name, Mossy. And Mossy had in his hand a little jewel. It sparkled in the firelight. Grandmother took one look at this jewel and exclaimed, "Why, it's the golden key." Mossy was curious about her excitement and also puzzled. What is the key for? Where do I find the hole? Grandmother answered, "You must look for the keyhole, Mossy. That is your work. I cannot help you. I can only tell you that if you look for it, you will find it." "What kind of box will it open?" asked Mossy. "And what's inside?" "I do not know. I dream about it, but I know nothing." "Must I go at once?" "You may stop here tonight and have some of my supper, but tomorrow you must go. All I can do for you is give you clothes, and I will also give you this little girl called Tangle. She, too, will go with you." "That will be nice," said Mossy. "No, no," said Tangle. "I don't want to leave you. Please, Grandmother." "You must go with him, Tangle. I'm sorry to lose you, but it will be the best thing for you." Grandmother then showed Mossy to his room, where he slept dreamily. When he awoke the next morning, he found a suit of clothes laying on the table next to his bed. Mossy put them on. Grandmother told him he looked very handsome in them. Tangle still did not want to go. She tried once more to convince Grandmother to let her stay. "Why should I leave you? I don't know this young man," she said. "I should like you to go with him, for he has the golden key, and no girl need to be afraid to go with a youth that has the golden key. You'll take care of her, Mossy, will you not?" "That I will," said Mossy. And Tangle cast a glance at him and thought, well, maybe she could like to go with him. "And," said the grandmother, "if you should lose each other as you go through, I can't remember the name of that country, but anyways, don't be afraid. Just go on and on." She kissed Tangle, and waving her hand eastward, she led them to the door, said goodbye. Mossy and Tangle took each other's hand and walked away into the depth of the forest. In his right hand, Mossy had the golden key. They wandered this way for a long time with endless amusement from the talk of the animals. They soon learned enough of their language to ask them necessary questions. The squirrels gave them nuts out of their own hoards. Even the blinking moles would fetch them an earth nut or a truffle now and then, talking as if their mouths, as well as their eyes and ears, were full of cotton wool or their very own velvety fur. By the time they got out of the forest, Tangle and Mossy were very fond of each other, and Tangle was not in the least sorry that her grandmother had sent her away with Mossy. At times it would appear that the forms they saw were strange, graceful creatures running up and down, and then disappearing into the wind-tossed foliage. As they walked, they waded knee-deep in a lovely lake. Sometimes Tangle and Mossy lifted their heads and gazed upwards to see from where the shadows that they saw were coming from. But they could see nothing more than a bright mist spread above them, higher than the tops of the earth. When they reached more open spaces, the shadows were thinner, and sometimes a profile of unspeakable beauty or grandeur would appear. It would appear for a moment and then vanish. So they continued to walk, focused on their goal of finding the country from which the shadows came, for that was the name that grandmother couldn't think of. They knew that there is where the keyhole awaited them. They continued on their journey. I cannot tell you how much time passed, but I will say that now Mossy's hair was streaked with gray, and Tangle had wrinkles on her forehead. They traveled into the shadows and then lost one another. This was very scary for Tangle, and she wept in despair. But then she remembered that grandmother had told them if they lost each other in a country of which she could not remember the name, they should not be afraid. Just go straight on. And besides, Tangle said to herself, Mossy has the golden key, and so no harm will come to him, I do believe. She rose from the ground and went on. Before long, she arrived at the mouth of a cave, and there she saw a beautiful little creature with wings standing beside her waiting. I know you, said Tangle. You are my fish. I am come to lead you through the mountain. Oh, thank you, dear fish. And together they flew through the long, narrow passage. Each time the fish's wings moved, they threw off a continuous shower of sparks of all colors, which ignited up the passage before them. And then, off in the distance, they saw a great rainbow standing far away against the sky on the other side of the sea. And there an old man came to greet her, saying, I am able to help you. I know I can help everybody. So Tangle drew near and looked up to his face. She burst into tears. Can you please tell me the way to the country that the shadows fall from? Yes, I know that way quite well. I go there myself sometimes. But you could not go my way. You aren't old enough. I'll show you how you can go. Please don't send me out into that great heat again, prayed Tangle. I will not, answered him. And he reached up and put his cool hand on her heart and said, You can go. No fire will burn you. Come. He led her from the cave, and there she found herself in a vast desert of sand and rock. The old man stood looking after her, till from the lengthening distance she could see him no more, and she continued to make her way through the desert. And just as he said, she stayed safe throughout the journey. In the meantime, Mossy reached the seashore. It was a dark, stormy evening, and the sun had set. The wind was blowing from the sea. He looked out to see a majestic figure walking along the shore. "Will you tell me where to find the old man of the sea?" "Well, I am the old man of the sea," the figure answered. Then he looked at Mossy more intently and said, "The night is stormy. Come to my house and tell me what I can do for you." Mossy followed him. And when they reached the cave where he lived, they sat down. They gazed at each other. By this time, Mossy looked much older than the old man of the sea, and his feet were very weary. After looking at him for a moment, the old man took him by the hand and led him into his inner cave. He saw that Mossy had one of his hands clenched together. "What have you got in that hand?" Mossy opened his fingers, and there lay the golden key. "Ah," said the old man, "that accounts for your knowing me." Mossy asked him, "What is that key for, do you think? For a keyhole somewhere? I don't know why I keep it. I could never find the keyhole, and I have lived a good while, I believe," said Mossy sadly. "I'm not sure that I'm really old, but I know my feet ache." "Well, why don't you look at yourself in the water?" So Mossy rose and looked at himself in the water, and there was not a gray hair on his head or a wrinkle on his skin. "You have tasted of death now," said the old man. "Is it good?" "It is good," said Mossy. "It is better than life." "No," said the old man. "It is only more life. Your feet will make no holes in the water now." "What do you mean?" "I will show you that presently." They returned to the outer cave and sat and talked for a long time. At length, the old man of the sea rose and said to Mossy, "Follow me." He led him up the stairs and opened another door. There stood the raging sea. Across the waste of waters, against the bosom of a fierce black cloud, stood the foot of a rainbow glowing in the dark. "Well, this is indeed my way," said Mossy, as soon as he saw the rainbow. So he set off on his journey by stepping out upon the sea, and just as the old man of the sea had said, Mossy's feet made no holes in the water. He continued on, fighting the wind and climbing the waves. The vision of the rainbow in the distance kept him focused and determined as he moved closer and closer to his destination. When the storm died away, the rainbow disappeared as well. A cool wind blew over the wide plain of the rainbow. Mossy continued to journey eastward. Day after day, he held on, feeling as if he had no guide due to the disappearance of the rainbow, but still he continued. And then, much to his surprise, he suddenly caught sight of a row of small sapphires. They bordered a little hole in the rock. "The keyhole," he cried. He tried the key. It fit. It turned. A great clang and clash as of iron bolts on huge brazen cauldrons echoed thunderously within. He drew out the key. The rock in front of him began to fall. He retreated from it as far as the breadth of the platform would allow. A great slab fell at his feet. In front of him was solid rock. But soon he was ascending into the heart of the precipice. It led him into a hall, and in the center stood 7 columns ranging from red to violet. And on the pedestal of one of them sat a woman, motionless, with her face bowed upon her knees. 7 years had she sat there, waiting. She lifted her head as Mossy drew near. It was Tangle. Her hair had grown to her feet and rippled like the windless sea on broad sands. Her face was beautiful, like her grandmother's, and as still and peaceful as that of the old man of the sea. Her form was tall and noble. Mossy knew her at once. "How beautiful you are, Tangle," he said in delight and astonishment. "Am I?" she returned. "Oh, I've waited for you for so long. But you are the old man of the sea. You're like the oldest man of all. And still you're my old Mossy. How did you come here? What did you do? Where did you go after I lost you so long ago? Did you find the keyhole? Have you got the key still?" Tangle had 1,000 questions to ask him, and 100 more he had to ask her. They told each other all their adventures and were so happy as man and woman could be. For now they were wiser and better than ever before. It began to grow dark, and they wanted to reach that country once the shadows fall. So they looked about them for a way out of the cave. And then the light came in from the moon. But it didn't look like moonlight, for it gleamed through those 7 pillars in the middle, filled the place with all the colors. And then they saw there was a pillar beside the red one, and on it was a sparkle of blue. The blue was the sapphires encircling the keyhole. Mossy took his key and turned it in the lock to the sounds of angelic music. And then the door opened upon slow hinges and disclosed a winding stair within. Tangle went up the stairs and Mossy followed, and the key vanished from his fingers. The door closed behind them, and together they climbed out of the earth and continued to climb, rising above it. They were now in the rainbow, far above the ocean and land. They could see through its transparent walls, the earth beneath their feet. Stairs beside stairs wound up together, and beautiful beings of all ages were climbing now along with them. They knew that they had truly found the country that Grandmother had described, and by this time, I think they must have gotten there. And so ends the story of the Golden Key. And I wish you now sweet dreams and good night.